Here you go. Electric versus petrol. The fuel price war picture. It's 2008. You pull into a petrol station, you fill your tank, you pay. You drive away, and don't think about it again for another week. That was just Tuesday. Now do the same thing today. You watch the numbers on that pump climb. And somewhere around the halfway mark, you start doing the maths in your head. Groceries, bills, anything that wasn't just getting you to work and back. That feeling at the petrol pump is not an accident. It is the result of decisions made in boardrooms and oil fields thousands of miles away from you. By people who will never stand where you are standing. Who will never watch that number climb and quietly calculate what it is costing them this week. And it is that feeling, multiplied across hundreds of millions of drivers in dozens of countries, that is driving one of the biggest industrial shifts in human history. Because someone saw it coming. Years before most people felt it. And they built an exit. The internal combustion engine has powered human transportation for over 100 years. Same fundamental idea the whole time. You take a fossil fuel that took millions of years to form underground. You burn it, you convert that explosion into motion, you go somewhere. It worked. Fuel was cheap, infrastructure was everywhere. Every mechanic on every street knew how to keep it running. The system was so deeply embedded in daily life, like in the design of our cities, the layout of our suburbs, the shape of our economies. That questioning, it felt like questioning gravity. You did not challenge the petrol car, you just drove it. But locked-in systems have one critical vulnerability that the people running them never want you to notice. They depend entirely on the thing at their center staying stable. And oil, it turns out, is the least stable thing in the world to build a civilization around. OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, controls the majority of the world's proven oil reserves. They meet. They decide how much gets produced. When you control the supply of something the entire world depends on, you control the price. And for decades, that arrangement held together well enough. Then things cracked. The global financial crisis sends oil prices swinging violently in both directions within months. A preview of what instability looks like at scale. A pandemic collapses demand overnight. Prices go negative for the first time in recorded history. Then demand returns faster than anyone anticipated. Infrastructure that was idled cannot scale back up fast enough. Prices spike higher than before. A war in Eastern Europe. Russia, one of the world's largest energy producers, becomes subject to sweeping international sanctions. Energy markets that were already stretched snap under the pressure. Petrol prices climb to levels that make headline news in countries thousands of miles from the conflict. In the United Kingdom, in Australia, in the United States, in Malaysia, ordinary drivers at ordinary petrol stations paying prices that 5 years earlier would have felt impossible. And each time the prices come down. But never all the way. There is always a new floor. A new normal that sits higher than the old one. The average family running a mid-sized petrol car is now spending somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000 a year just on fuel, depending on where they live, depending on what the market is doing that month, depending on decisions made by people they will never meet about a resource they cannot control. That number is going up. And the people who understood that it would, years before most drivers felt it in their wallets, they had already started building something else. Now let me be straight with you. Because this is the part where a lot of content about electric cars turns into a sales pitch, where the narrator puts on the bright, optimistic voice and tells you the future is clean and simple, and all you need to do is make the switch. I am not going to do that. Because it is not honest. Electric vehicles are not perfect, they are not magic, they are not the answer to every problem every driver in every situation is facing. Anyone telling you this transition is simple and painless and obviously correct for everyone is either not thinking carefully or is trying to sell you something. But here is what the numbers actually say. And the numbers are not subtle. The cost of running an electric vehicle, the actual day-to-day cost of charging it and driving it, is significantly lower than the equivalent petrol car in almost every market on Earth. In many markets, we are talking about a third of the cost per mile, sometimes a quarter, day after day after day. And as petrol prices rise, which structurally they will, that gap gets wider. The upfront purchase price is higher. That is real, and it matters enormously. Buying an electric car still costs more than buying a comparable petrol car in most segments of the market. That is the single biggest barrier, and it would be dishonest to wave it away, but that gap is closing. Fast. Every credible analyst tracking this market is pointing at the same window, somewhere in the next 3 to 5 years, where the purchase price lines cross. The EV becomes cheaper to buy and cheaper to run simultaneously. At that point, the rational economic argument for choosing a new petrol car becomes very difficult to construct. That crossover is not a projection made by EV enthusiasts. It is the working assumption of the finance departments of every major car manufacturer on Earth. And those people are not idealists, they are accountants. They follow the numbers wherever they lead. Look at what is actually happening right now in the industry. Volkswagen, Ford, General Motors, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Stellantis. These are not startups with something to prove. These are companies that have been engineering and selling petrol cars for 100 years. That is their identity, their workforce, their entire institutional knowledge built up over a century, and they are retooling, all of them. Simultaneously, Volkswagen Group has committed $180 billion to electric vehicle development. Ford has restructured its entire company, creating separate divisions specifically to give its EV operation room to grow without being slowed by the legacy business. General Motors has announced it will stop selling petrol-powered passenger vehicles entirely by 2035. Mercedes has committed to going fully electric in markets where infrastructure allows by the same date. These are not press releases written by marketing departments. These are capital allocation decisions backed by the kind of money that cannot be redirected without catastrophic financial consequences. The people who built the petrol car, whose careers and identities are built on the internal combustion engine, looked at the data and concluded that the era they spent their lives building is ending. That is not a signal you can ignore. But here's the part that makes me uncomfortable. The part that gets left out of the optimistic version of this story. Not everyone gets to make this transition on their own terms. The families stretched to the absolute limit of their budget cannot absorb a higher purchase price even if the running costs are lower. The 5-year calculation looks obvious from a distance. It looks impossible when you cannot fund the first month. The rural driver, whose nearest charging point is 40 miles away, the worker in the engine plant, whose skills are being phased out of existence. The town whose entire economy was built around a gearbox factory that the industry no longer needs. The people who can afford to exit the petrol system will exit it, and they will be better off for doing so. So the people who cannot are left more exposed than ever. Because as EVs take market share, the economic case for maintaining the petrol infrastructure weakens. Fewer stations, higher prices at the ones that remain, a system in managed decline with tens of millions of people still completely dependent on it and nowhere else to go yet. That gap between the future that is coming and the present that is not finished yet deserves to be spoken about honestly, not glossed over in the excitement about what is next. So where does this leave us? The fuel price war is real. It is structural. It is not going away. The forces driving petrol prices upward are not temporary disruptions. They are baked into the geopolitics of a world slowly and messily moving away from fossil fuel dependency while still being completely reliant on it. The floor keeps rising, the volatility keeps increasing. The number of variables a petrol driver cannot control keeps growing. The electric vehicle is not a perfect solution, but it is a real one. And the window where it was a niche product for early adopters with something to prove, that window has closed. This is mainstream now. The fastest growing segment of the global automotive market. With government policy across Europe, China, and North America actively accelerating the transition through incentives, infrastructure investment, and binding phase-out dates for new petrol car sales, the petrol car is not disappearing tomorrow. But it is disappearing. The question is not whether you make the switch. Eventually, through economics, through policy, through the simple reality of a market moving decisively in one direction, the switch gets made. The question is whether you make it on your own terms, or whether rising fuel prices, shrinking infrastructure, and an industry that has already moved on make it for you. That feeling at the pump, the one that started this whole conversation, it is only going to get stronger. The exit exists. It has always existed. The only question left is when you decide to take it.